Am I live right now, Goose? Am I good to go?
Yeah, you're live.
Alright, good. Hey guys, it's me, Meister from Sage Makes Pickles, and I wanted to tell you that all that shit is really unnecessary, and I've come around to just eating them raw.
What the fuck?
Did he just eat a whole
I'm so sorry about that.
without...
What the hell just happened?
I don't know.
Dude, why were you just so silent there? I thought you were gonna say something, but you were just like, this is to Meister. This is to Meister. You were just so quiet. Like,
What the fuck?
What?
I guess it was pickle time.
Yeah, it's pickle time, obviously. That's what I sponsor.
That was impressive.
He just eat a
And
whole...
he just ate the whole fucking pickle like it was nothing.
We should probably check on him to see if he's okay. Like, he said it was a raw pickle. Is that healthy to eat like a raw pickle that's been unpickled?
I mean,
Do you know
Wait.
what a raw pickle is?
it's just a fucking pickle.
It's
There's
a
no-
cucumber.
It's always raw.
Oh,
Yeah, cucumber. So, fun fact: cucumbers grow raw on the vine. They don't grow cooked.
I just know the pickles are supposed to be in jars and stuff. I never. Okay, that's oh gosh, I made myself live on stream not knowing that how pickles existed.
Right. Well, whenever actual Meister goes over his fucking fermenting bits, I'll have to be able to I'll be able to talk about my own fermented hot sauces and whatnot. But fucking God, Goose, what did you do?
I got a sponsorship real quick. That's all. I was given $5.
I knew it. I knew it. I thought like, hey, here's $5. Let me do something. And Goose was like, all right.
I am going to send a fucking pizza to your house covered in pickles, and there's nothing you can
Oh
fucking
yes,
do
please.
about
Here,
it.
let me give you my.
Actually, hamburger pizza sounds nice.
I already have it. God damn it.
You don't have to look for it.
Oh my
I
gosh.
can use once on somebody else.
This has been the pickle hour.
Not yet. It hasn't. Okay, I guess. Just okay. Is there any closing comments? If not, I'll just fucking go. I don't even know how. That's a fucking. I don't know how that blindsided me. That blindsided me, and it threw me off my rhythm.
That is
I
one
will
of the
admit.
most impressive things I've ever seen.
I pride myself on being able to eat pretty fast, and that was genuinely impressive. I mean, that's almost. Okay, wow.
My man absolutely devoured it.
Man was
Yeah.
hungry.
Complete savage.
I feel disgusting. I write smut where like rim jobs happen, and I feel disgusting.
I
don't know why he was wearing a mask. I feel like the mask was like. Just added.
I mean, it's right. It's for the same reason, right? Gimp masks have zippers on them because you only need
Oh.
access to one thing.
Oh my god! Come on. Oh. We probably lost some viewers. But I would like to say something smooth. I think your segment was great. And hopefully this inspires a lot more people who want to do fanfics to write their fanfics and get them out there, to accept criticism, to break boundaries, and get some new stories out in this community. And I think you did a good job of trying to inspire those people or trying to help those people.
Thank you.
In wake of that, only 5 viewers are gone, and I think it's mostly people who are going to come into the call. So we've lost nothing.
Good to know. Good to fucking know. Okay, I guess that works. That works. Oh Christ! All right. Well, thanks for having me on here. I
Actually,
guess.
a viewer.
Ooh. When I first interviewed on here, there's like only like 76 people on your subscribers. So hey, you've got numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Shit,
I'm going
these doing
to
numbers.
Shit, this one doing numbers.
It's doing numbers.
142 separate individuals have at least clicked on.
There we go.
I
like to think
we got 20 people.
I like to think I got like 5 of those people
In
just because of my name. Just 5. That works.
How many do you think the Snoot Club announcement got the other day?
Oh, plenty. All right. Well, I'm going to go get myself some water. I'm going to think about this and how I was hungover as fuck this morning, and I feel like this kind of just tops it all off with this as an experience.
The ibuprofen that you needed.
I get the ibuprofen, yeah, and I'll be sitting here nice and quiet while you ride my hair and talk about your pickles next, I guess.
Woo!
Alrighty, well, passing this along then to... Oh yeah, the sprites, by the way, the sprites of me and Meister here, they're from Arkin as well. So, Arky, good job. Once more, Jesus Christ. Done.
I hope somebody clipped that, by the way. The event.
Oh boy.
I think someone did.
I hope somebody did. They better have.
Okay, so I am. Oh boy. Okay. I just need like a moment to compose myself. Oh dear. Okay. So now I have to follow that up. I had the show stolen from me by a fucking. I think that was like a Serbian. Do we just let random people into the server now?
Yeah, if they give me money.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah. You said he paid you off.
That was a paid sponsorship.
I have pickle. I'm going to shove in mouth and eat for your entertainment.
Was it not entertaining?
I had myself muted. I was howling with laughter. God damn. Okay. All right. Well,
how I kept it so calm, frankly.
I think everybody was just watching in horror.
Well, I knew it was coming.
Is the only way
so
I can
of course
describe.
I wasn't in horror.
Well, of course you did. All right. Anyway, I'm gonna.
How did I
get
keep that in? Is it because I'm masterfully stone-faced?
I'm just gonna get my fucking. Hold on. Get my presentation ready. Put it on the first page so we can all enjoy. Okay, so I have to share. Oh boy, this is gonna be a bit of a boomer moment.
You see that little screen icon that has an arrow inside of it? You're gonna want to click that.
No, shut the fuck up. I know. I just want to make sure that you can see. Hold on, wait. Make sure that you can see the right screen. So it's the full size screen here, right? It's not the other one.
It was the full size screen, but now we can see all the slides. Click your present button from beginning, or from current slide. There.
Okay.
Certified boomer moment.
Aren't you like an electrical engineer?
That doesn't mean I'm good with computers. That means I'm good with sand that thinks.
So computers.
Why? Okay, yeah. Wait. Why is it showing? Okay, there we go. Wait, no. Now it's showing the whole thing. Oh, wait. Is it doing that thing where it bounces in between?
Buddy, we can see every single slide you have.
Yes, I know.
You had it for a second.
Okay, wait. What if I do this and then I go this? Is it still doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Why?
Did you share your screen or did you just share the presentation?
Oh, I did that. Okay, I did that again. I remember we had this exact same.
I'm back.
Wow, holy shit, I'm stupid. Hold on, I don't know how to use the computer box.
I have no idea how to use the big rectangle thing.
Okay, now this should work.
Kioma is still in the call, waiting for something of intelligence to be said, I'm sure.
Okay, is it working now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank fucking Christ. Alright. Hello everybody, my name is Meister Tea. As my namesake, I am literally pouring 212 degree water into a cup that contains a sachet. The sachet contains several herbal substances that could be known to the common man as tea. And now I am walking back to my computer where I will begin to talk about home food preservation methods, because that is what I am here to talk about today. Alrighty, so I have, let's see, I think I have like 38 slides or something. 39 slides, so let's just fucking get this started. So I always like to start off with just a little broad overview of what we'll be talking about today. So obviously, right, food preservation, duh, but specifically just a little bit going over why the fuck do you care? Right, obviously, why do you preserve food? It's a pretty easy answer, but there's other reasons why you might preserve them in specific ways. Then we'll just go through a little bit of a crash course on microbiology. I would like to point out I am not a microbiologist, so this will be very high level. Then talk a little bit more about mechanisms to counteract said microbes. So antimicrobial stuff, some mechanisms and methods by which you can achieve antimicrobial environments, which leads into, right, all the different kinds of foods, jellies, jams, fruit preserves, different kinds of fermentation, specifically focusing on alcoholic and lactic acid fermentation, and then ending talking about pickling. So you might be wondering, all right, if I'm going to sit here and talk to you about food safety and food preservation methods, why should you trust me? I'm just some random fucker on the internet. I have no visible credentials, except I have brought my resume, and I will say that I am practically experienced in fermentation. This is a small selection of photos that I've taken over the past, I want to say 2 or 3 years, regarding home food preservation, right? So everything from alcoholic fermentation, vinegar-based pickling, making my own yogurt, pickling eggs, making salsa, jellies, jams, hot sauces, tepache, wines, meads, ciders, Brussels sprouts. I think I see one of them there. Yeah. So I have a decent amount of experience. So I like to think that I know what I'm talking about. But also, I'm not just coming at you with this as, oh, this is what I've always done. This is how it should always be done. When I do, especially when I do something new that I've never done before, or when I do something that I think has any level of risk inherent to it, which when it comes to home food preservation is most of it, right? There's a tiny amount of risk. But you always want to make sure that you know what you're doing, at least right coming at it from kind of the more, scientific angle. So there are plenty of sources, especially, right, I'll get into some of them later on, but lots of good research and resources have been done into the topic of food preservation. Obviously, humanity has preserved food for a long time. So, there's a lot of USDA documents. There's research from institutions in the United States and abroad. Plenty of people have done copious amounts of detailed research so that you know exactly what you need to achieve to make sure that you are preserving your food safely. So, I'm not just doing this from what I know, I'm also backing it up and supporting it with plenty of, evidence-based research. And lastly, you should trust me because this isn't quantum mechanics like the presentation earlier was. This is something that you can very easily and realistically achieve by yourself. Humans have been preserving shit for thousands and thousands and thousands of years using various different methods. If they can do it, so can you. It's really not that hard. So with that all being said, why the fuck would you bother? Why bother doing your own food preservation? I can just go to the grocery store and I can buy pickles, I can buy, beer, I can buy all that stuff. Why would I do it myself? Well, it does give you access to a very nearby and easy source of different kinds of food all year round, right? That you can just have in your pantry and not just necessarily, having the food itself, but having the interesting types of food, right? It's interesting, it's unique, it's tasty, it's different. Because, right, yeah, you could go to the grocery store and you can probably buy, blueberry, strawberry, grape, jelly, jam, whatever. but can you go to the grocery store and buy strawberry rhubarb jam? Can you buy black raspberry jam? Can you buy black currant and red currant jam? Can you buy spiced wild plum jam with plums that you picked from your local park? Right? There's some things that you just can't as easily get your hands on that if you make it yourself is much easier to have access to. I kind of skipped over one there. They are great for gifts, especially jelly and jam, right? I have found very few people in my life that don't appreciate getting a little jar of jelly or jam as a gift, right? Either on the holidays or just because they did a solid for me and I want to give them something small to show my gratitude. Usually very well received. People like sugar, people like jelly and jam. And of course, lastly, at least I think it's fun. There is a level of satisfaction and just joy that I get out of making my own food. And especially when it comes to making these things that I can then put on my shelf or in my, kind of jarring cellar. And then at any point in time, right, especially when you make this stuff in the summer and the fall, in the dead of winter, when it's all cold and everything sucks and it's dark, you can go and pull a jar of applesauce or a jar of pickles or some salsa, and it's just it hits different in the winter when you otherwise don't have as easy access to those tasty things. So, all right, so now we're going to get into the shack meat of it, so to speak. Start out with a little crash course on microbiology. So, everything's covered in tiny organisms. You are covered in tiny organisms. The desk that you're sitting at is covered in tiny organisms. The chair, the floor, the bed, everything, every surface of everything that is not a sanitized clean room is covered in tiny little fungus cells, yeast cells, bacteria, viruses, all kinds of shit. Everything is covered in tiny shit. So, that being said, there's a lot of different kinds of tiny shit. Like a lot. Like, there's kind of entire phylums dedicated to classifying tiny shit. And all the different kinds of tiny shit need different conditions to be able to thrive, proliferate, reproduce, not die. And we could, this in and of itself isn't just a whole presentation. This is a whole field of study, for God's sake. So we'll just kind of break it down into some very relevant types. We'll say there's aerobic microbes, there's anaerobic, there's thermophiles, and there's acetophiles. And just to kind of break that down, so aerobic means they require oxygen to survive. Anaerobic means they can survive in oxygen-devoid environments. Thermophiles mean they are resistant to either high or low temperatures. And then acetophiles means that they are able to proliferate in very acidic environments. Right, these are just some very, very broad categorizations of microbes, but relevant to the discussion that we'll get into in a couple slides. So, this is probably the worst microbiology 101 class you will ever attend, so thank you for coming. Now we're going to talk about how to kill these little fuckers. So now we're going to talk about antimicrobiology. So, right, if you have microbes who like environments that are acidic, that are not acidic, that are salty, not salty, hot, cold, oxygenated, not oxygenated, the way that you kill them is you create an environment that is hostile to them. And the way that you can create environments that are hostile are either by outright killing them, so methods that directly kill the microbes that you don't want, or you can create conditions that prevent the reproduction or growth or proliferation of those microbes. Those might sound like the same two things, but really quick example here is if you take a pot of water and you boil it really hard on the stove, you will kill everything in that water, but then when it comes back down to room temperature, it will no longer be a hostile environment, and if another microbe comes along and it gets into that pot of water, it could then, start reproducing and doing all kinds of stuff in there. So you kill the existing cells, but you don't prevent growth. Now, if you boil the pot of water and then you, as it cooled down, put a antibiotic or an antimicrobial, you put a bunch of liquor in there, you put a bunch of vodka in there, and you bring the alcohol content up to 10%, and then you seal it in a bottle. That will prevent the growth of future microbes, and you will have a sanitized environment. So, kind of talked about it a little bit, but, right, antimicrobiology. How do you do this? How do you kill them? How do you prevent... Apparently, because there's no noise coming through my headphones, they will shut themselves off every once in a while, so I just want to make sure everybody can still hear me.
We can.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah, so how do we do this? Well, like I mentioned, you create environments that are hostile to the life of whatever it is you're trying to kill. So you add or you remove their source of food. Well, in this case, we don't really have that option because we're trying to put food into a jar and they're going to eat whatever we put in there. You can oxygenate or deoxygenate the environment, which is also not a great method. You can remove water, which is a great method. You can heat it up really hot to kill them, or you can chill it down to inhibit their reproduction. You can raise or lower the acidity. There's other methods as well, but these are kind of the main ones that we'll focus on for the purposes of talking about food preservation. So, going forward with a couple terms that we want to talk about, because I'll mention them as we get more into the details of talking about food preservation. One of them, and this is probably one that most of you are not familiar with, but is very important, is something that's known as water activity, sometimes abbreviated as AW. Water activity is the ratio of the vapor pressure of the food itself versus the vapor pressure of distilled water. Now, that probably doesn't intuitively make sense to most of you. It didn't really make great sense to me until I looked at a picture of it. So there is a wonderful diagram over here on the right. Basically, what it's saying is if you take a pot of distilled water and then you put it into a sealed container and then you measure the vapor pressure of that, right? That's a vapor pressure of 1. It's normalized. And then you measure the vapor pressure of what substance you want to measure the water activity of in another container, and then you take that pressure and then you divide that pressure by the pressure of distilled water. That gives you your water activity index. Basically, it is a measure of the viability or of the availability of water, H2O, in the substance that you have. So basically, right, extreme example, if you took, right, let's just use something stupid, sand, completely dry sand, and you put it into one box and you measure the pressure of that, and then you measure the vapor pressure of distilled water, you would get a water activity of 0 because there is no water. So just to kind of put some numbers to it, a water activity of greater than 0.95 is considered sufficient for the growth of basically all microbes. So you definitely don't want to have water activity greater than 0.95. And another important index is, or another important kind of breaking point is a water index below 0.85, which is going to inhibit the growth of most microorganisms. Now, there are certain types of microorganisms that are known as extremophiles. Extremophiles are going to potentially be able to exist in these conditions that we're trying to create that otherwise would prevent the growth of most microbes, but they are a extreme exception and they are not the rule, and most extremophiles are not going to be commonly found in your residential setting where you're going to make these things, so you shouldn't have to worry about them for the most part. Right, just to give an example, right, extremophile, thermophile bacteria, a lot of those live in hot sea vents at the bottom of the ocean, and they're not going to exist outside that environment, so you don't really have to worry about those getting into your food unless you're trying to can, like, sea worms or something. So, another term, and this is one that most of you are probably a little bit more familiar with, or you have at least heard, is acidity, which is measured on the pH scale. What most of you probably don't know is what pH actually means. So pH is a measure of the concentration of positively charged hydrogen ions in a substance. It's measured using this equation here. Basically, it's the negative log base 10 of the concentration, or sorry, negative log base 10 of the number of hydrogen ions in a solution. And on the pH scale, right, that goes from 0 or 1, I forget, all the way up to 14. Every step up or down represents a 10 times dilution or a 10 times concentration of the number of hydrogen ions. So a pH of 7, I believe means 10 to the negative 7 hydrogen ions. And then if you go all the way down to, say, a pH of 1, that is a concentration of 10 to the 1 hydrogen ions. Or sorry, 10 to the... I'm getting my numbers mixed up, but essentially it represents, right, every step that you go up or down on the pH scale. So from, say, 3 to 4, that is going to be a 10 times more acidic solution. If you go from, say, I said that backwards, from 3 to 4 would be a 10 times dilution. From 4 to 3 would be a 10 times concentration. So you just have, right, far more acidity as you step up or down 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so on. Okay, it does range from 0. And one of the most common ways that you can measure the pH of a material is by using indication strips, pH indication strips, also known as litmus strips. Here pictured, I have a litmus paper that ranges from 0 to 6. This is very useful for home canning, specifically because this is the range that we're interested in. If you have something that's a pH above 6, you really don't care. And if you have something that's a pH of 0, you need to get that out of your house, because if you look at it funny, it might kill you. All right. Now we have to talk about, and I have a couple slides on this, I believe this is the last topic that isn't specifically related directly to talking about food, is the scary microbe that everybody fears that has ever done any kind of home canning or that has done any kind of research into this. Mr. Clostridium botulinum. You've probably heard the term botulism. You definitely know what food poisoning is. And if you know anything about botulism, you know why I'm going to harp on this very, very hard. Clostridium botulinum, which I'm going to just call CB, because I don't want to keep saying that word because I'll keep pronouncing it wrong as well. It is a bacteria that creates a toxin that causes botulism in humans and other animals. Botulism is not a nice condition. We'll get into why that is in a couple slides here. CB forms structures that are known as endospores. I actually have a gram-positive staining photo of one on the right. So those black rods are the actual CB cells themselves, and then you have those little clear ovals that are known as endospores. Basically, what an endospore is it is a kind of a genetic subset. It is a small, hardened, non-living copy of the genome of the bacteria itself. It's not an egg. It's not the primary mechanism by which the bacteria reproduces. It is a spore that is formed when the bacteria encounters a condition that is very hostile but does not outright kill it. It is a survival mechanism. The reason that these spores are important and that I'm talking about them is because they are able to survive conditions that will actually kill off the living cells themselves. Now, I believe I might be speaking incorrectly by saying that the spores are not living. They might technically be classified as living things. I am not sure off the top of my head, but suffice to say that they are a hardened shell that under correct conditions, under more ideal conditions, will turn back into a living botulism cell, or a living CB cell. And just to kind of make it a point here, while the actual living cell itself will die in the condition of boiling water, say 212 Fahrenheit, 100 Celsius, the spores are not. Very specifically, they are not killed. You can boil botulism endospores all you want. They are not going to be destroyed. And CB will proliferate in environments that are moist, oxygen devoid, and in that should say high pH environments, not low pH environments. That is a typo. My bad. So, might be asking yourself, if you're not super familiar with CB, why am I choosing to talk about it so much? That is because, at least in the United States, insert your own joke about this, but Improperly home canned goods are responsible for greater than 90% of all food poisoning cases in the United States every year. Now, food poisoning is not explicitly caused by CB. There are a ton of other things that can cause food poisoning. But the difference between the type of food poisoning that CB causes and that most other bacteria, fungi, yeast, or microorganisms cause are that those types of food poisoning are usually not life-threatening. They're not fun, right? They're not great. Some of them might require hospitalization, right? Like salmonella or I believe listeria or say E. coli. But they are not nearly as pressingly life-threatening as opposed to CB, which the CB cell produces something known as botulinum toxin. And botulinum toxin is, to known science, the most dangerous form of food poisoning. And just to put a number to that, when properly treated under ideal medical conditions, there is about a 5% lethality rate. So flip that around, 95% survivability rate for cases of botulism. And just to kind of differentiate, when I say botulism, botulism is the medical condition that is caused by ingesting botulinum toxin that is formed by CB. I might switch around my words because I actually had to train that out of myself when I was practicing this presentation, because I will sometimes just refer to, the spores themselves as botulism, even though that's not correct. But when you talk about it, people usually know what you're saying, right? Botulism's a scary word. You don't want it. So if I haven't scared you enough, now we're going to go over a little bit more about the actual disease itself, botulism. So I said that botulinum toxin, it's a toxin. Specifically, it is a neurotoxin, which is not great. Neurotoxins are usually pretty nasty substances. Symptoms of botulism include muscle weakness, double vision, facial drooping, postural hypotension, constipation, nausea, vomiting, involuntary loss of muscle control, disruption of automatic nervous control, dyspnea, cessation of respiration, and eventually, potentially, death via hypoxia and or central nervous system failure. So it's not like you just get a stomach ache or you throw up and you get some aches and some shakes and then you feel better. No, it is a acute neurotoxin, and if it is not properly purged from the system and treated using modern medical methods, there's a very realistic chance that even a completely healthy individual could die from botulism, basically because eventually it causes you to stop breathing properly and then you suffocate. So, that being said, an alternate title for this presentation could be Don't Fuck Around When You're Dealing with CB, because it can fuck you up and you may die. Probably not where you thought this presentation was going, but I find this all to be very important. You might say, you're scaring me. Sorry about that. I promise that botulism really isn't as scary as I'm making it out to be. And the reason for that is because it's actually very easy to control the environment that botulism normally propagates in. And so now we can actually start to get into kind of the more food-related side of all of this. So how do we control the environment for CB? And when I say this, right, I'm focusing specifically on CB, but by creating an environment that is hostile to it, you are also creating an environment that is hostile to most, if not all, commonly known microorganisms that would potentially be harmful to you as well. So if you follow the guides and steps to prevent the formation and proliferation of Clostridium botulinum, you will also create an environment that is hostile to most other things that would be able to make you sick. So we harp on it, but that's because it's the one that if you fuck it up, it can kill you, versus the other one, if you fuck it up, you might just be sick for a day or two. So you make the environment hostile, obviously, right? That's kind of what we've gone over. even slight disruptions to its ideal conditions will massively impede its growth. And then going a little bit further, you will create an environment that is outright completely impossible for it to exist in a form that is dangerous. And when I say the vegetative form, that's a term that is used to describe the cell form, or the form that actively reproduces, produces the toxin, produces endospores, I'm not talking about the endospore form. The endospore form, in its isolation, can be consumed safely by people who aren't infants. All right, so you control it. You can have high oxygen levels. CB is, I forget the word for it, but it is a mandatory or necessary anaerobe, I believe is the term. Basically, what that means is that under normal atmospheric oxygen concentrations, so basically room ambient oxygen concentrations, these cells will die. It is unable to survive at normal room conditions. So say if you leave a bowl of water sitting out on your counter, botulism cannot survive in that. So, right, that's why botulism isn't nearly quite as scary, and why it's not necessarily everywhere is because it can't survive in these conditions. Now, the spores can, but botulism itself, the part that's actually harmful to you, it cannot. Right, and so necessarily anything that's dry, anything, any dried goods probably can't survive in that as well, because those have very low water activity, which is right what we talk about here. So if you have water activity under 9.93, that will also destroy living botulism. If you have acidity that is below 4.6, same thing. It cannot survive in this environment. And then the last thing that you can do is you can actually use methods that eradicate spores. Now, I've talked about these spores as though they're indestructible. That is not true at all. They're just not destructible using, I would say, more commonly accessible methods, right? You can't destroy them with acidification, can't destroy them with low water activity, can't destroy them by boiling. However, if you raise the temperature above boiling, specifically to around 240 Fahrenheit, 250 Fahrenheit, which is around about 115 to 121 Celsius for our non-imperial friends, you can destroy the endospores of botulism. So, I've vaguely mentioned processing in hot water. I've vaguely mentioned pressure canning. So now we'll talk a little bit about that. So hot water processing is the method by which food is packed into glass jars. A rubber gasketed lid is added to it, secured with a metal band, and then it is placed upright in a boiling water bath that is not pressurized and is boiled at 212 Fahrenheit for a differing amount of time, depending on what kind of food it is, and also depending on whether it is hot packed or cold packed. And what I mean by hot pack versus cold pack, that just means what you're putting into the jar when you seal it up and then you put it into the boiling bath. Is that substance already hot, or is that substance already cold? And there are reasons, specific reasons, depending on what type of food you're making, why you would want to do hot pack versus cold pack. So to kind of give an example there, right, like if you're making and jarring hot sauce, that's probably going to be a hot pack because you've probably cooked it beforehand, right? If you are choosing to cook your hot sauce, and then you would put it into the jar hot, versus if you say just cut up a bunch of cucumbers and then onions and other stuff, put them into jars, and then you put your brining solution or your vinegar solution over them and then seal them up. That would be a cold pack. And hot pack versus cold pack also changes processing times, logically following. Hot pack needs to be boiled for less time. Cold pack needs to be boiled for more time. But again, that will vary significantly depending on your specific recipe. There is no blanket amount of time. And obviously you don't want to process for too long, because if you process for too long, you'll just turn what's inside into mush. And if you don't process for enough time, you won't kill all of the living microbes inside, and you might have things that survive, and you don't want that. Very important thing, and I feel the need to say this again, hot water processing that is not pressurized does not kill botulism endospores, and it requires other mechanisms such as low pH, low water activity to ensure that you do not have proliferation of botulism spores, turning into living botulism cells. I mentioned that you can eradicate those cells, and that is with, like I mentioned, pressure canning. So pressure canning is basically the answer to the question of what if we killed everything, including the endospores, in what it is that we're trying to can. And if you do this, you actually don't need to maintain acidity levels or water activity levels. You could take a raw piece of meat and you could put it through pressure canning methods and then seal it into a jar, and it should stay good for as long as that seal is valid. It might not be tasty, it might not be great, but you could do that because you would kill every last living thing inside of that jar and then prevent new living things from getting into it, and it would not rot, mold, be consumed, form noxious things. It would be safe to eat for a long time. There are other mechanisms of spoilage, but I'm not going to talk about those because those are very long-term weird things. So, pressurized canning, as I mentioned, allows you to take the temperature of water above 212 Fahrenheit. There's a whole thing of chemistry and pressure and why if you keep the vapor pressure above water, above 1 atmosphere, the boiling point of water increases. I don't remember why that is, but suffice to say that in a pressure vessel, you can reach temperatures of up to 240 to 250 Fahrenheit, or slightly higher. That's just the number that you need to reach to kill botulism endospores. So, slight warning about pressure canning. I know my presentation is full of a lot of these. I apologize. We will talk about food eventually. Pressure canning and pressurizing hot water is kind of fucking dangerous. Well, no shit, Tea. You need to make sure you use a properly rated pressurized vessel, and you know what you're doing before you do this, right? This is not something that you should just do on a whim. You need to make sure you have specialized equipment, because a inadequately used pressurized vessel or a improperly maintained pressure vessel, you are building up a high concentration of pressure inside of a container on your stove, and you're heating it and you're heating it and you're heating it. That's a bomb, right? Pressure cookers, pressure vessels usually have safety release valves that would cause it to vent before then, but suffice to say, pressurizing stuff can be a little bit more dangerous. So just make sure that you know what you're doing before you go and do this one, especially. Alrighty. So you might be listening to all this and saying that, okay, I'm talking about these different environments that you need to create that are hostile to CB spores or other endospores, and saying that sounds a lot like a lot of types of food that I know. And very astute observation, viewer. Good job, gold star. That is what basically all shelf-stable foods outside of using chemical preservatives do. That's how they are shelf-stable, is they follow these methods that we've kind of gone over and explored from the ground up to ensure that they are shelf-stable for long amounts of time. Again, right, as I've mentioned, till I'm blue in the face, food preservation methods tend to focus on the prevention and growth of CB, and by extension, right, other very similar bacterium and microbes. I already said that. So, holy shit, 20 slides in or 19 slides in, and we can actually finally start talking about food. I'm going to take a sip of tea and see if there are any questions.
Outstanding.
All right.
Fucking standing.
Huh?
Oh, I'm just saying outstanding.
Oh, yeah, I've been pacing
Everybody's
around
just
as well.
Calmly learning.
All right, well, now we can talk about food. So, first thing we want to talk about is, I would argue, one of the simplest. This is the first one that I learned. So, I mentioned I have a lot of experience, showed photos from the past couple of years, specifically regarding fruit spreads, jellies, jams, marmalades, preserves, that kind of stuff. I have been making this for as long as I have been able to reach the stove and help my parents do it. So, been making jelly and jam for at least 20 years. So, near and dear to my heart, love this shit. I probably couldn't name all the different jellies and jams that I have in my canning cellar right now. So, anyway, kind of a couple different categories of them, right? Jelly, jam, marmalade, preserves, right? All basically roughly the same idea of you take sugar and you take fruit and then you cook it down till it kind of turns into a nice syrupy, sappy, sugary, thick concoction. And then you pack it into jars, and then you hot water process it. And then that can sit on a shelf for years and years and years and years, and it'll be perfectly good. Sometimes you might get tiny, tiny bits of oxidation on the top, but that's not inedible. It just might change the flavor slightly. In most cases, it doesn't taste horrible, but you do want to prevent that if you can. But what some of you might be wondering is, what are the actual differences between, right? You probably hear jelly, jam, marmalade, preserves, butters, right? What the fuck is the actual difference between all these? Well, jelly is made from fruit juice, and jam is made from mashing up that fruit, the whole fruit, and then cooking it down with sugar. Right, jelly you cook down with sugar as well. Preserves are when you have large chunks of chopped fruit, right? So if you took strawberries and cut them in half, and then you cooked those down, and then you made that into something, that would be preserved. So you have large chunks of the fruit that remain. It's not mashed into a pulp. And then marmalade is you make jelly, but then you reintroduce chunks of the rind. Specifically, this is done for citruses, right? So lemon marmalade, the one that you're probably more familiar with would be like orange marmalade, lime marmalade. You could technically make grapefruit marmalade, though I've never had that. And then last one that you've probably heard about is fruit butter, which is kind of like jam, but the difference between fruit butter and all of the above ones is that fruit butter has far less added sugar, because unlike the other ones on this list, you don't cook it down, or you cook it down far further. So all the other ones on this list, you usually don't want to get rid of too much of the moisture that's in the fruit, so you don't cook it for a super long time. Whereas butter, fruit butter, you literally cook the fruit down till you turn it into a pasty, pulpy goo. And then at that point, the sugars that are naturally occurring in the fruit are concentrated enough to give it a sweet flavor. So you don't have to add additional sugar to it. So usually fruit butters are actually a lot healthier than the other things here, because they typically have a lot less sugar in them. Right, less added sugar. So it's, it's more akin to eating the fruit itself, as opposed to eating the fruit itself and then downing, 10 spoonfuls of sugar. So the mechanism by which, right, fruit preserves, so you've probably started to put things together, as I had that whole 20 slide spiel before this of, right, how do fruits actually, right, how does the preservation method actually work, specifically regarding, fruit preserves, fruit spreads, whatever. Big thing is that high sugar content will lower the water activity, usually to, 0.8 or lower. And then fruits themselves are naturally quite acidic. So in most cases, fruit actually has a natural pH that is below 4.6, which already means from the get-go, you have a substance that is not going to allow the proliferation of botulism. There are some recipes, a lot of recipes will usually have you add a little bit of lemon juice or a little bit of citric acid powder just to buffer the acidity, to add a little bit more to it, right? So, instead of it being 4.5, kind of right on the hairy edge, you add some lemon juice and you knock it down to 4, and then you're, almost a full point of pH lower than where you need to be. It's just for safety. But also, more acidic solutions do prevent oxidation over time, which that's not for safety, that's just for retention of flavor and color, and there's other reasons why you'd want to do that as well. So, there are some fruits that naturally are fairly low acidity, like apricots, plums, figs, dates, mangoes, those sorts of fruits. Those ones you absolutely do need to add more acid to. You do need to add lemon juice or something else, or mix them with a fruit that has a lower pH, because those ones naturally are, pH 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6. When in doubt, use your pH paper, use your pH meter, right? Use your litmus paper and check it. And then also, if you don't have that, when in doubt, add a little bit more citric acid to buffer it down. And just know the pH of the fruit that you're working with when you go and do this, right? Follow a recipe. Don't do this by intuition, if you've never done it before, especially, because then you don't have intuition, and your intuition is probably wrong. And then, like I said, this is processed using hot water cannon. So that was fruit preserves. Now I want to talk a little bit about fermentation. So fermentation, just a quick definition here. It is a redox, which is just a type of chemical reaction where the oxidation number of one of the compounds involved gets reduced and the other one gets increased. Basically, it's just a type of chemical reaction. I probably explained that slightly differently, and if there are any chemists in the chat, they're probably going to scream at me, so I apologize. I'm not a chemical person. It's a metabolic process conducted by microorganisms in which organic compounds are broken down, specifically in the absence of oxygen. So that is one of the other definitions. Is fermentation, by definition, is an anaerobic process. It does not take place in the presence of oxygen, or it does not take place quickly in the presence of oxygen. So there are two primary types of fermentation. One of them is alcoholic fermentation, which I have a little diagram over here that just kind of goes over a very basic pathway. Don't worry about focusing on that. I just kind of have it there for posterity's sake. And then you have lactic acid fermentation, which same thing, little diagram over here, basically just showing that you take glucose or some other organic sugar, and then you break it down, and then you have byproducts, and then you end up with your desired end product, which is either ethanol or lactic acid. Technically L-acetate, but same thing. All right, so first one we'll talk about is alcoholic fermentation. So alcoholic fermentation is primarily conducted by yeast, and you've probably heard the word yeast a lot in your life. You've heard it used, regarding bread and alcohol production. You might be wondering what the hell yeast actually is. Yeasts are single-celled microorganisms that are actually in the fungi kingdom, interestingly enough. They are not protozoa or in a different kingdom. They actually are fungus, right? So as opposed to hyphae or mushroom-forming fungi or molds, they are not a network of organisms. They are actually single-celled, so eukaryotic organisms. And just on the right, two common forms of yeast. The one on the left is kind of like baker's powder, right? So that kind of weird crumbly powder stuff. But then on the right is a bulk yeast cake. So that would be used in large scale fermentations, industrial scale fermentation, right? So if you're making a giant, multi-thousand gallon batch of beer, you would use a giant yeast cake. Whereas if you're just, making bread, you'd use a half teaspoon of active dry yeast or something. So, as I mentioned, sugars are metabolized and turned into ethanol and byproducts through this more simplified diagram here. So, you have your glucose, you have your yeast, feasts on the glucose, and then you get your desired product, ethanol, and then you get carbon dioxide and you get heat as byproducts. As mentioned, anaerobic process. It's also a self-limiting process, and what I mean by that is, it's not it is a process that will rate limit itself at some point, right? Almost all chemical reactions are, right, unless you have a completely out of control reaction. And the limitation of the process is that the yeast needs food, obviously. It needs sugar. If you don't have sugar, the yeast don't have anything to eat on, and they'll start to autolyse or they'll start to consume other things, which is not desirable because then they won't produce ethanol. They'll produce other things that you don't want. And that can be dangerous or that can be nasty or both. But usually the thing that will limit or that can limit if you're not careful is the actual environment for the yeast itself. So when you first pitch yeast in a alcoholic fermentation process, you usually have the environment be something that is very hospitable to them. But even though the yeast are producing this ethanol byproduct, eventually they will produce an environment that is hostile to them. And they will slowly produce less and less and less until they reach an equilibrium, and then all the yeast fall out of suspension and go dormant or die. So that can either be due to too much acidity, too much carbon dioxide in the solution, too high of an ethanol content, or too hot. All of these things can kill alcoholic fermentation. So, as I mentioned, there are a lot of byproducts, right? So, obviously, yeast in an ideal world would just eat the glucose, and then they would just produce, pure ethanol, carbon dioxide, and heat. So, the is that the yeast will eat a lot of different stuff. And when they metabolize other things, you get all kinds of other byproducts. You might have heard the term fusel oils or, non-desirable fermentables. They produce all kinds of weird and interesting different flavors. There are so many different kinds of yeast. You could spend forever talking about them. I don't want to go into too much detail, but here's just 4 yeasts that I've personally worked with in fermenting stuff. An example of a unique byproduct and flavor, specifically the type of beer that is known as a Hefeweizen. It is made from, Smooth, correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think that one follows the Bavarian purity law, where it's just wheat, barley, wheat, hops, yeast, and water.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and even though it just uses those 4 ingredients, Hefeweizens are notable for containing flavors that can be associated with clove and banana, which makes no sense because there are no cloves and there are no bananas added to Hefeweizens. They are byproducts of the fermentation process of specific types of yeast that will produce those notes. Those are those desired byproducts.
So can I type in that real quick? The reason why it tastes like banana is due to the presence of a little alcohol as acetate, isoamyl acetate. That happens during the fermentation and the alcoholic runoff byproduct.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I believe that can also be isolated in a lab, and that's what they use as artificial banana flavor. So in like Laffy Taffy.
Yep, that's it.
So, and different yeasts will produce different byproducts. Different yeasts will be able to survive different alcohol concentrations. Some yeasts are more resilient. Some yeasts are more sensitive. I could do a whole 2-hour presentation on yeast alone, but I don't want to do that. So we're just going to keep moving along. So you might be kind of wondering, this initial pitch of stuff when you're making alcohol is it's a low oxygen environment and it doesn't have a very low pH. It's very wet. That sounds like it's a recipe for growing botulism. Well, no, obviously no, because alcohol exists in many forms, and I have never heard a story of somebody getting botulism from alcohol. And as far as I was able to research, I actually did try to look at this. I couldn't find any stories or records in the United States of that happening either. But wort, mash, and must, which is just the initial uninoculated form of the wheat, the barley, the fruit, the honey, the whatever, the stuff that you want the yeast to eat to produce your alcohol, that is often acidic by its very nature, It contains fruit, it contains honey, it contains malted grains or roasted grains, which are more acidic. And then that's often sterilized or pasteurized. So either cooked to kill off all existing microbes, or it is pasteurized where it is heated to a level that kills off most, but not all microbes. There's reasons for doing one versus the other. And then the byproducts of fermentation actually will sometimes, depending on the type of acid and type of things being, or type of yeast and type of must or stock being fermented, will cause further acidification. So, and here's just a picture of a carboy, I believe, because this is bottom fermenting. That makes this a lager. I don't know why they're lagering at room temperature. That's kind of stupid. And then, there are some additives that have their own microorganism or their own antimicrobial properties. One of them, big common one, being hops. There are compounds in hops that are hostile to a whole slew of different microorganisms. And then the last and biggest one is that with an ABV above 4%, the proliferation of CB is greatly slowed. And then once you get above 6%, CB is unable to reproduce. So for any alcohol that has, brain fart. Any alcohol that has an ABV above 6%, or any drink that has an ABV above 6%. Wow, I'm sorry. Diffuse thought. You can't have proliferation of that above 6%. And then if you're between 4% and 6%, you probably have a more acidic beer. So you can think or a more acidic alcoholic product. So you can think ciders or a tart beer or, a Saison or a farm ale or something like that. those will have a pH below 4.6, but they might have an ABV that's only, 4.5, 5.5%. And that's how those can be shelf stable and why you don't have to worry about the growth botulism. So, mentioned that there's another type of fermentation. That one is known as lactic acid fermentation, and that is done by Mr. Lactobacillus. Is a genus, so not a specific species, but a whole genus of bacterium. They turn sugar into lactic acid as opposed to turning sugar into ethanol. And that produces all matter of tasty stuff, like yogurt and pickles and sauerkraut and all kinds of good and tasty and wonderful stuff. As mentioned previously, or kind of the same thing as alcoholic fermentation, it's an anaerobic process. It's self-limiting, right, based on available sugars and the environment that it's put into. So I do just want to take a slight detour and put some respect on the name of Lactobacillus. So we've talked a lot about, CB and other nasty little microbes, and you might be thinking that I have a hard-on for hating microbes, and that could not be further from the case. Lactobacillus is fucking awesome. So it's a genus. There are over 260 known and categorized species of Lactobacillus. One of the ones that some of you might stand a chance of knowing or having heard previously before this presentation is Lactobacillus acidophilus. You might have heard of this because Lactobacillus acidophilus is one of the primary lactobacillus organisms that is used in the production of yogurt. And I mentioned this previously that, microorganisms are everywhere. Lactobacillus is literally everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Inside of your mouth right now, there are probably several species of Lactobacillus. There are other orifices of the human body that contain Lactobacillus as well. It is present in your gut fauna. It is present under your fingernails. It is present in your belly button and in your armpits. It's present fucking everywhere. Lactobacillus is scarily prolific. It's not spore forming. It is acid loving. That's actually where Lactobacillus acidophilus comes from, because acidophilus is a specific acetophile type of Lactobacillus. It is non-toxic and it is a probiotic, so it is completely safe to consume, and your body will not have a problem with it, as long as you're not eating straight colonies of it or anything. So, as opposed to CB and other nasty microorganisms, Lactobacillus is your friend. He fights for flavor. He fights for food preservation. Do not fear Mr. Lactobacillus. So, time to talk about food again. That was a little bit too much down in the nerd shit, so I'm just going to show some pictures. So this past week, in preparation for this presentation, I actually kicked off my own set of lactic acid fermentation. So I got some green cabbage, chopped that up. I got some peaches and some mango, and then I got some peppers that I had frozen from last year, and then I got some cucumbers and some onions and some garlic. And what I did was I added a little bit of salt to all of these, and the reason that I added salt to them is one of the ways that you can make an environment that is very hostile, not just to CB, but also hostile to other types of microorganisms, is you can slightly salt or salinify the thing that you want to ferment. And Lactobacillus doesn't mind a salty environment to a point, usually between about 2 and 5% salt by weight concentration is what you want when you're trying to kick off a lactic acid fermentation. So another thing to note is when you do alcoholic fermentation, you sterilize and then you pitch your specific yeast because you want to control what type of yeast goes into these. I did not do any of that for lactic acid fermentation, and the reason for that, as mentioned previously, lactic acid bacteria is literally everywhere. The lactobacillus that exists in cabbage, in the skin of peaches, in the skin of cucumbers, in the skin of onions, in the skin of basically any vegetable, under correct conditions, is sufficient to kick off natural fermentation. That is because, again, Lactobacillus is everywhere. It's very prolific. It's a very strong microorganism. So if you give it the right conditions, it will grow. And it will outcompete all other microorganisms. And because it produces lactic acid, it will naturally acidify the environment that it is in, which by definition, will make it hostile to CB and other nasty microorganisms that you don't want to consume. So basically, the lactobacillus creates an environment that is nice for it and other companion bacterias or companion microbes that are also safe to consume as well. So I did not inoculate these at all. And actually, when I worked with them, I specifically work without gloves so that I kind of add more bacteria to the food as you're kind of processing it and getting it ready. That sounds a little nasty, but that's just how that works. I mean, microbiology is kind of gross if you think too much about it. So I just have a little bit of a day by day. So this was day 0. On the left, we have potato wedges. In the middle left, we have cucumbers and onions and garlic and then some spices. Right of that, we have cabbage and carrots. And then to the right of that, we have that pepper mango peach mash. So after about 24 hours, this is very common. Cabbage is a notoriously easy fermenter. After about a day of activity, I was starting to see bubbles in the cabbage. And you'll notice that all of these have vents on the top of them. That is because one of the byproducts of fermentation is the production of carbon dioxide. And if you seal these, they will become bombs as well. So you don't want to do that. So these lids have vents on them. But you can see that the cabbage was active enough that it pushed liquid up and out of the airlock. So it's starting to burp and vent juice already, which is an indication of a strong and healthy fermentation. So I just have some pictures of the progression. So day 0, day 1, day 3, day 7. One thing to take note is specifically on the ones on the left, the potato wedges and the cucumbers, you can see that the liquid slowly gets cloudier and cloudier. That is also another indication that you have microbial activity, right? Is basically they will start to flocculate. They will become suspended in the liquid, or sorry, flocculation is the opposite. They become suspended in the liquid. They make it cloudy. They make it hazy. So you can tell that there's all kinds of stuff going on in there. And then if you look at the bottom of the jar, I don't have pictures of this, but you can see the accumulation of dead microorganisms as well. And they'll kind of form like a white ring of kind of like a pasty, gloppy substance at the bottom. That's just like dead cells. Dead yeast cells, dead lactobacillus cells. And that's also kind of partially what forms that cloudy medium as well. So also what I did was, right, we talk about acidification, we talk about that. This is another way that you can track the health of your ferment is you keep an eye on the pH. So I took readings every 24 hours, sometimes a little bit sooner, sometimes a little bit further apart, but roughly every 24 hours. And there I have the botulism safety line of pH 4.6. And you can see that after about 3 and some change days, 3 of my ferments were below that. So the cucumbers, the cabbage, and the peppers are all well below that now by day 7. The potato one I will talk about in a second, but that one was kind of stupid. I have a theory as to what happened there. Another important thing to keep in mind is temperature. Right, lactobacillus is very prolific, but if it gets too cold, it will not be able to proliferate well enough, and it could allow the formation of other things, other less desirable microorganisms. So a temperature between about 60 and 80 degrees, I think 80 Fahrenheit is ideal for most forms of lactobacillus. But also if you get it too hot, you will get other weird flavors. So I find that a temperature of about 72-ish degrees is pretty good. And you might wonder, why the hell is it bouncing around for the first 3 days and then it goes to 72? That's because I realized I was being stupid, and I have a sous vide machine that I can use to just keep the temperature of the water bath that I had these in at the same temperature. So I just put that in, and then it kept a stable 72 degree Fahrenheit fermentation temperature the whole time. Another reason you want to keep stable temperature is that if you have fluctuating temperature and it swings too wildly, that actually can stress the microbes and you'll get weird flavors, versus maintaining a stable temperature where you will get a more characteristic and more uniform kind of flavor. And then this is just showing, right, the pH versus temperature versus time, just putting them all on the same page. You can kind of see that around day 3 to 4, where that pH really started to take a nosedive, that was also at the same time that I bumped up the temperature by about 6-7 degrees. So the activity of the lactobacillus really kind of rocketed off. just to comment on the pickle or on the pickled potato wedges, what I think happened there, if I go back a couple slides here, you can see the potatoes, they are large wedges, whereas all of the other things are much smaller pieces. And my suspicion is that fermentation didn't kick off properly for those potato wedges because they were large chunks and they didn't have enough surface area exposed, which meant that the access of microbes to the sugars contained within and the starches contained within the potatoes was more limited, which caused fermentation to kick off much slower. And accordingly, the pH kind of didn't really drop too much from 6 or greater than 6 over time. It kind of meandered around 5.5, 6. And I did see evidence of microbial activity, right? Flocculation, and then the dead cells at the bottom. But it actually kind of smelled slightly more alcoholic. So my theory is that I actually had an unintentional alcoholic fermentation, not a true lactic acid fermentation. That being said, I still fried them up in hot oil that would be hot enough to kill. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. Headset turned itself off again because I'm yapping too much. Anyway, the potatoes tasted fine. I ate them. They were good, but
I have a question about the potatoes in
Yes.
the pictures of them.
Yeah.
So it looks like they kind of shriveled up on day 3, and then at day 7 they like puffed back up a bit.
So something I didn't talk about here is if you look on the top, so look at day 1, at the tops of all of them, I have weights. They're glass weights that I put on top of all of the mashes,
Gotcha.
and that's to keep all of the solids underneath the liquid, because the problem is if they rise above the surface of the liquid, then that becomes exposed to oxygen, and then you can have aerobic processes, right? You can have fermentation or proliferation of microbes that respirate in an oxygen environment, and that's usually molds, right? That's how you get mold, is you have something like this where you have chunks floating on the surface, and those will grow mold, and it'll be spoiled and it'll be ruined. So that's just because I would go in every day and press down on the weight to remove some of the bubbles. And on day 3 and day 7, I had the jar spun differently, or I had pressed it differently, and they just kind of move around. So I was actively messing with these when they were fermenting. So that's why.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've recently fermented quite a few eggs.
Yeah.
And I've weighed them before, so I noticed that they looked a little scrunched, and then 7 they were popped back up.
Now, one that you can see more clearly is where the cucumbers, those do get crushed down and they don't come back up. That's because those are bruising and those are kind of breaking down slightly. All right, let's get through the last part. So I do just kind of want to blitz through this last part and get to the Q&A, but thankfully I only have about 5 more slides, so I'm making good time. So I just want to go on a bit of an axe grinding tirade here. So people talk about pickles and they say pickles and they think that cucumbers are the only thing that pickles are. No, there are 2 major types of pickles. There are those that are driven by a lactofermentation process that we just talked about, which is a microbe-driven process. It's an active process. It relies on living organisms. And then you have vinegar-based pickles, which is a chemical, individual chef or, you-driven process. It's also more of a passive process, right? Whereas lactofermentation actively acidifies your vegetables, and it needs to be kind of a little bit more actively maintained. Vinegar pickling is a more passive process where you create the environment that the pickles are in, you seal them up, and then you forget about them for 6 months, year, however long. And then this is just a picture there of, on the left, lactic acid pickles, and then on the right, those are some lime pickles. And when I say lime, I don't mean like lemon lime, I mean calcium hydroxide lime. I could do an hour-long presentation on that as well, but I only have so much time. So, all right, so this is actually the side that I meant to talk about, ranting about pickles, that pickling is, by definition, just the preservation of food using acidic solutions. That's all that pickling is. That's all that pickles are. There are many, 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 many types of pickles that are not cucumber pickles, right? You can take tomatoes, you can take mangoes, you can take apples, you can take pears, you can take eggs, you can take beef, and you can put it into an acidic solution and then boil it to kill off the microbes, and then have that sit on your shelf and be shelf stable. And that is pickles. Those are pickles, right? You can have pickled meats, you can have pickled herring, you can have pickled eggs, pickled this, pickled that. People say pickles and they think cucumbers. There is more to pickling than just cucumbers. There is everything. Just about any food could be pickled. You could be pickled. And I think I've insulted people, and I've I have threatened people by threatening to pickle them before, and you could pickle a human being. I'm not recommending you do this. In my FBI...
Isn't that a very similar process?
What?
Isn't that kind of wouldn't that do a similar thing to mummifying somebody?
That is embalming, but yes, it would be a form of preservation.
It would be closer to bog bodies.
Yes. Yes, yeah, right, because bogs have a low pH and a cold.
Bog bodies.
You should not eat bog bodies, and you do not recognize the bodies in the bog. So anyway, couple last slides here to round out. So talked a lot about food, talked a lot about pickling and doing all that stuff. If you do want to do this yourself, and I do highly recommend it, I will leave a couple closing notes here and say that quality in, quality out, right? That's a mantra that can be applied to a lot of things in life, and with food preservation is absolutely one of them. You want to use quality base ingredients if you want to get a quality product out. So my best advice to you is get to know your local farmer market, or go to a farm, or buy things that are in season, or go pick your own shit or grow your own shit, because that is how you're going to get the freshest stuff to make your pickles out of, or your jams or jellies or whatever in the first place. And that is going to lead to a better flavor down the line. If you cannot get access to these things fresh and in season, the next best option would be to find fruits that are picked at the peak of their ripeness, or vegetables that are canned at the peak of their ripeness, right? Sometimes they're flash frozen. There are other methods, right, where things can be picked at the peak of their freshness and then used. That I have as a separate one, because it's not as ideal as having the stuff fresh. But I digress. The last thing to kind of leave you on here is that shit will happen, right? I just kind of talked about all this stuff, and I, threw my resume out, and I've talked high and mighty about this, but you will fuck up, right? You'll have a jar break. I had it happen. Here's a picture of it. This was a peach mango salsa that I was making. Actually, those are yellow tomatoes, so it's a peach mango, yellow tomato salsa. I had a can shatter, right? Unfortunately, sometimes that'll happen. It's not very common, but you will have things happen. You'll be processing it. It'll break. It's sad. It sucks. Don't get discouraged. You might have something go bad. I made a plum wine, or tried to make a plum wine 2 years ago. I picked 10 pounds of plums from a local park near me, and I pitched them with sugar, did the whole proper pasteurization process, followed all the steps, fermented for 3 months. It was looking great. It flocculated nicely. I was able to rack it. It was really clear. It was really wonderful. And then here's a picture of my review of that plum wine. It was nasty. It was vile. It was horrible. I don't know what happened. I think some of it might have just been the base ingredients weren't as good as I thought they were. Some of it might just be that the plums I used weren't great to make wine out of, right? You're going to have fuck ups. Keep trying. Don't get discouraged just because you fuck up once, right? Trying to make something, you make your pickles and they turn out soggy. Well, look around online. There are ways to ensure a more crisp pickle, right? Maybe you overprocessed, you boiled it for too long and it broke down. So my throat is starting to hurt because of all these pickles that I've been shoving down there. And so with that being said, does anybody have any questions, or I can just kind of open it up to the floor? And I also do have plenty of sources as well that if you want to take a look at any of these, I'll leave them on the screen. I realize that people watching on YouTube can't click these links, and I apologize for that, but if you literally search for USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, it'll pull up a 193-page document. The National Center for Home Food Preservation, I believe it's managed by the University of Georgia. That's a great website that has very surface level information on most food preservation methods. There is something called the Noma Guide to Fermentation, which is a very nice book. That's about $45. If you want it, it's kind of more cool just to read. But if you want just kind of the bones of it, you can actually find a predecessor to it. If you type in Noma Guide to Fermentation, you will find, I believe it's just called like Noma. It's a PDF that you can find online that was released back in 2016 for free that basically contains the essentials of that book. And then you can't click that one, but that was just one that I found from a University of Clemson source. It's a reference table for pH of common raw foods, right? So, apples, bananas, pears, vegetables, you name it. It's got common pH levels for those kinds of foods. So that was an hour and 10 minutes.
What is the easiest vegetable to pickle?
Sauerkraut.
And your favorite?
Or wow, sorry, easiest vegetable. The easiest vegetable is cabbage, and the reason for that was those aforementioned reasons. Of cabbage grows very close to the ground. It has a lot of folds in the leaves, and when it's growing and forming, it will trap a lot of dirt and soil, and therefore lactobacillus cultures in its leaves, and also it has a very high accessible sugar content. So you don't need a lot of salt to kind of start it off. And all of those things contribute to cabbage fermenting, lactic acid fermenting very, very easily. So cabbage sauerkraut is by far the easiest. And if you're going to start this, do sauerkraut as long as you follow a recipe for it. I'm not going to say it's impossible to fuck up because I did fuck up sauerkraut once. It is very hard to fuck up.
And what is your favorite vegetable to pickle? Let's make it right. What's your favorite thing in general?
Yeah, it's probably between cabbage and cucumbers, though I will say that I think I lean more towards it's kind of a cabbage, onion, carrot, and spice medley that I've started making. It's just kind of like sauerkraut on steroids. Right, I use like a little bit of a celery seed, and I think I put like oregano in there. There's a couple of other flavors, and it's almost more like fermented coleslaw. Actually, now that I think about it.
Have you thought about taking that fermented mix and putting in some mayonnaise for a mayonnaise-based coleslaw?
I have now. That sounds. I actually had that thought forming in my head as you said that. It's like that actually sounds really good.
Summer's here. Try it out.
Whew. Okay, I'm gonna. Evil. All right, now I can check the chat here. We've probably got a lot going on here, so let's scroll back. Yeah, because I couldn't see the chat when I was doing this. So let's see here. What the fuck? Was that pickle Rick? It's just a cucumber. Raw pickles. All right. Does anybody here have any questions before I just start perusing the YouTube comments?
Now, you mentioned you brought up wine. Have you ever done fermentation on honey?
Yes, I have. In the presentation, in that first slide that I showed, there actually were a couple jars of mead. I actually have fermented honey. I've done mead before. Now, it wasn't just honey, right? It was honey and fruit. And then I could go into a little bit more detail there, but right, yeah, there's more to it, but yeah, I have done mead. It's quite good.
So
yeah, I have some that me and my brother made still. I don't know how successful we are. It smells like alcohol. It tastes like alcohol.
Can everyone hear me?
Flavor's not great.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
awesome. Howdy. Just making sure my mic's all good before I try to go talking. So like 30 minutes, and it's just pure silence.
All good.
I have a question, Meister.
Yes.
So, you've talked about your favorite thing. What is something that it worked out completely fine? It was, a successful fermentation, but you just didn't like it.
So this isn't that I don't like the food itself. It was just something that I made that didn't turn out quite right. Was making my own kimchi.
Mm.
And I believe the reason for that was in commercial kimchi production, right? So commercial sauerkraut. Right? I'm talking about home preservation methods, specifically with lactic acid fermentation. I rely on naturally occurring bacteria, which does kind of necessarily mean that I am up to the random chance of what specific blend of lactobacillus cultures exist in the vegetables that I buy, or that just happen to be in the air that day, or happen to be on my skin that day, right? All that stuff. In commercial production, they have specific strains that they inoculate their vegetables with to kick off fermentation to ensure that they get a more consistent product, more consistent flavor. I have tried to do kimchi several times, and it just doesn't turn out right. I like kimchi. I really like kimchi, but doing it myself at home, I just haven't gotten it down pat. I don't know if it's just me or if I'm missing something, but I have not been able to make a good kimchi that I like better than stuff I bought in the store, as opposed to sauerkraut, where I have made sauerkrauts that I do prefer over store-bought stuff.
The only time I've had a successful kimchi was quick pickling.
Yes, well, which is right. Quick pickling is vinegar pickling. It's not fermentation pickling, which is a whole different beast. Yeah.
But yeah, I've had a similar outcome where it's just like, I did everything right. Why isn't it good?
Yep. Well, and so some of that could be that, right, if you do have too much exposure to oxygen when you do the pickling, right, the fermentation, you'll get aerobic respiration, which there's a very common bacteria known as Aerobacter or Acetobacter, which form acetic acid, which is not a great flavor, because acetic acid is the acidic form of the acetate ion, which in its basic form, I believe, is acetone, which is a very aggressive, right? You know what acetone smells like. Acetic acid is similarly pungent to the nose. It's not unsafe to consume in small quantities, but it's not a very tasty thing, and you don't want it in your food, right? A little bit of it will smell and taste very wrong.